The aged fighter plane stood proud, its once gleaming hull now weathered and scarred from decades of relentless combat. This was the Thunderbolt, a legendary craft that had seen humanity through some of its most harrowing battles against alien invaders and rogue factions. Its pilot, a seasoned veteran known only as Callum, had bonded with the machine over the course of countless missions, their partnership forged in the crucible of war. As the decommissioning process unfolded around them, Callum couldn't help but feel a pang of melancholy. This wasn't just the retirement of a piece of hardware, it was the end of an era, the severing of a bond that had sustained him through the darkest of times. He had survived battles that would have broken lesser men, his skills honed to a razor's edge as he pushed the Thunderbolt to its limits time and time again. The technicians moved with a sense of reverence, their hands caressing the fighter's hull as they carefully dismantled its systems. They understood the significance of this moment, the historical weight that the Thunderbolt carried. This was no ordinary decommissioning. It was the twilight of a legend, the final chapter in the saga of a machine that had become synonymous with humanity's resilience and triumph. Callum watched, his piercing gaze fixed on the proceedings, as if committing every detail to memory. He could still recall the first time he had taken the Thunderbolt's controls, the rush of adrenaline as he pushed the craft to its limits, dodging enemy fire and delivering devastating strikes against the forces that threatened his world. Those memories were etched into his very being, a part of him that could never be erased. "Sir, we're almost finished with the preliminary systems checks," a young technician said, approaching Callum with a respectful nod. "The Thunderbolt will be ready for transport to the scrapyard within the next few hours." Callum's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. The scrapyard, the final resting place for a warrior that had earned the right to be laid to rest with honor. He knew this day was inevitable, but that knowledge did little to ease the pain that threatened to constrict his chest. "Thank you, Corporal," Callum said, his voice measured and calm, betraying none of the turmoil that raged within him. "Ensure that the Thunderbolt is handled with the utmost care. This craft deserves nothing less than the reverence it has earned." The technician nodded, his eyes reflecting a glimmer of understanding. "Of course, sir. We'll treat her with the respect she's due." As the corporal turned to rejoin his team, Callum let his gaze linger on the Thunderbolt, drinking in the sight of the craft that had been his steadfast companion for so many years. He remembered the day he had first laid eyes on it. Fresh out of the academy and eager to prove his worth, the Thunderbolt had been a work of art, its sleek lines and powerful engines a testament to humanity's technological prowess. But it was more than just a machine to Callum. It was a living, breathing entity that had become an extension of his very being. Together, they had faced down the darkest threats, their bond forged in the crucible of battle. The Thunderbolt had saved his life countless times, its advanced systems and deadly armaments turning the tide of countless engagements. And now, it was being reduced to little more than scrap metal, its legacy consigned to the dusty annals of history. Callum felt a deep, aching sorrow, a sense of loss that threatened to overwhelm him. This was more than just the decommissioning of a fighter plane. It was the end of an era, the passing of a torch that had illuminated humanity's path through the vast, unforgiving expanse of space. As the technicians continued their work, Callum stepped closer to the Thunderbolt, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of the craft. He could almost hear the rumble of its engines, the hum of its systems as it came to life under his command. It was a sensation he had experienced countless times, a connection that had become as natural as breathing. "It's not over, old friend," Callum whispered, his voice barely audible over the din of the decommissioning process. "There's still one more battle to fight." With a renewed sense of purpose, Callum turned and strode away, his mind racing as he formulated a plan that would prevent the Thunderbolt from meeting its ignominious fate. The fighter plane had earned the right to die with honor, and Callum would be damned if he let it be relegated to a scrap heap without a fight. The skies above the decommissioning facility were suddenly alive with a cacophony of alarms and warning signals. Callum whirled around, his heart pounding as he caught sight of the approaching enemy vessels. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Sleek, angular craft with a menacing, otherworldly appearance that sent a shiver down his spine. All units, scramble. We have incoming hostiles. Repeat, we have incoming hostiles. A voice blared over the communication channel. Chaos erupting as the meager planetary defenses scrambled to launch their own fighters. Callum's gaze narrowed as he watched the alien ships descend, their weapons systems powering up with a low, ominous hum. He knew that the local forces stood little chance against the technological superiority of these invaders. Their ships were faster, their armaments more powerful, and their tactics unlike anything the human pilots had encountered before. Without hesitation, Callum turned and sprinted back towards the Thunderbolt, his mind racing as he formulated a desperate plan. The old fighter may have been slated for decommissioning, but it was still the most capable warship in the immediate vicinity. If there was any hope of turning the tide of this battle, it lay within the Thunderbolt's battle-hardened frame. "Belay that order," Callum bellowed, his voice cutting through the panicked chatter. "Corporal, get your team back on that fighter. We're putting her back into the fight." The young technician, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fear, hesitated for a moment before nodding and rushing to relay the orders. Within moments, the decommissioning process ground to a halt as the technicians swarmed the Thunderbolt, their fingers flying across the familiar controls as they raced to reactivate the dormant systems. Callum could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he stepped up to the Thunderbolt's cockpit, his hands caressing the worn leather of the pilot's seat. It had been years since he had taken to the skies in this legendary craft, but the muscle memory was as fresh as ever. He slid into the seat, his fingers instinctively finding the familiar controls as he powered up the Thunderbolt systems. "Come on, old girl," Callum murmured, his eyes narrowing as he watched the alien fleet descend. One last dance. With a thunderous roar, the Thunderbolt's engines ignited, the powerful thrusters propelling the craft into the air. Callum felt a surge of exhilaration as the familiar vibrations rumbled through the airframe, the fighter responding to his touch with a grace and agility that belied its age. Below, the human defenders were being overwhelmed, their ships unable to make a dent in the alien vessel's formidable defenses. Callum gritted his teeth, his hands expertly guiding the Thunderbolt through a series of evasive maneuvers as he lined up his first shot. "All units, fall back and regroup," Callum ordered, his voice calm and commanding. "I got this." Without waiting for a response, he unleashed a barrage of missiles, the deadly ordnance streaking towards the alien ships with unerring precision. The invaders, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, struggled to respond, their once confident formations descending into chaos as the Thunderbolt weaved through their ranks, its weapons blazing. Callum's eyes narrowed, his focus laser-sharp as he pushed the Thunderbolt to its limits. He knew that the old fighter's capabilities were no match for the alien vessels in a prolonged engagement, but he also understood that he didn't need to win the battle outright. All he had to do was buy the human forces enough time to regroup and mount a coordinated counterattack. As the Thunderbolt danced through the firestorm, Callum's mind raced, his years of combat experience guiding his every move. He knew the fighter's systems inside and out, and he leveraged that intimate knowledge to devastating effect, exploiting the alien vessel's weaknesses and capitalizing on their overconfidence. The tide of the battle began to shift, the human pilots regaining their confidence as they witnessed the Thunderbolt's relentless onslaught. Emboldened, they surged back into the fray, their weapons adding to the devastation that Callum was unleashing upon the invaders. "That's it, just a little longer," Callum muttered, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of the alien fleet's command ship. If he could take that out, it might just be enough to turn the tide of the battle. With a deep breath, Callum lined up his shot, his finger tightening on the trigger. The Thunderbolt roared, its weapons blazing as it unleashed a devastating volley of missiles and laser fire. The assault focused squarely on the alien command ship. The invaders, their confidence shaken, struggled to mount an effective defense, their ships faltering under the relentless onslaught. Callum pushed the Thunderbolt to its limits, weaving through the chaos as he continued his assault, determined to deliver a decisive blow that would send the alien fleet into full retreat. As the command ship erupted in a fiery explosion, the remaining alien vessels quickly disengage, their retreat a testament to the power of the Thunderbolt and the skill of its pilot. Callum watched them go, a grim sense of satisfaction etching his features. "That's right, you bastards," he growled. "Run." With the immediate threat neutralized, Callum guided the Thunderbolt back towards the landing pad, his mind already racing with the implications of this unexpected turn of events. The old fighter had proven its mettle once again, and Callum knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger battle to come. As the Thunderbolt touched down, a crowd of stunned onlookers gathered around the legendary fighter plane. Callum could see the awe and reverence in their eyes, their expressions a mixture of relief and disbelief. The old war horse had once again proven its worth, single-handedly turning the tide of a battle that had seemed hopelessly lost. Callum emerged from the cockpit, his steps weary but his gaze resolute. He knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. The alien invaders would return. And when they did, the human forces would need every advantage they could muster. "Sir, what do we do now?" A young lieutenant approached him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Callum's jaw tightened as he considered the question. The decommissioning process had been well underway, and he knew that the Thunderbolt systems were not fully operational. They would need to act quickly if they were to have any hope of keeping the old fighter in the fight. "Lieutenant, gather your best technicians and engineers," Callum commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "We need to get the Thunderbolt back into fighting condition, and we need to do it fast. The aliens will be back, and when they are, we'll need every weapon we can muster." The lieutenant nodded, her expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Right away, sir. We'll work around the clock if we have to." As the lieutenant rushed off to assemble the necessary personnel, Callum turned his attention to the Thunderbolt, his hands caressing the familiar metal frame. He could feel the old fighter's spirit, as if it were urging him to push forward, to do whatever it took to ensure its survival. "Don't worry, old friend," Callum murmured, his voice low and determined. "We're not going down without a fight." Over the next few hours, the decommissioning facility was transformed into a bustling hive of activity. Technicians swarmed the Thunderbolt, their fingers flying across the control panels as they worked to restore the fighter's systems to full operational status. Callum stood by, his keen eyes observing every move, offering guidance and expertise whenever needed. As the sun began to set, the Thunderbolt's engines roared to life, the familiar thrum of power resonating through the air. Callum felt a surge of pride as he watched the old fighter come back to life, its weapon systems primed and ready for battle. "She's ready, sir," the lieutenant reported, her face flushed with exertion. "All systems are go, and the weapons are fully loaded and operational." Callum nodded, his gaze fixed on the Thunderbolt. "Good work, Lieutenant. Now, assemble your best pilots and prepare for the next round. We're going to need every capable hand we can get." The lieutenant hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed with concern. "Sir, with all due respect, are you sure you're up for this? It's been years since you've flown in combat. Maybe we should." Callum raised a hand, silencing her with a gesture. "There's no one else who knows this fighter better than I do," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "I'll be leading the charge, and I expect you and your pilots to follow my lead." "Understood." The lieutenant nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, sir. We're with you, all the way." As the human forces began to gather around the Thunderbolt, Callum couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. The alien invaders had caught them off guard, their superior technology and tactics proving to be a formidable challenge. But he knew that they couldn't afford to be caught flat-footed again. Stepping up to the Thunderbolt's cockpit, Callum ran his fingers along the familiar controls, his mind racing as he formulated a plan of attack. He knew that the old fighter's capabilities were limited compared to the alien vessels, but he also knew that they had one crucial advantage: a veteran pilot who had honed his skills over decades of combat. "All right, listen up." Callum's voice rang out, commanding the attention of the assembled pilots. "The aliens will be back, and when they come, we'll be ready. We may be outmatched, but we have something they don't: the Thunderbolt, and a pilot who's been through hell and back." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd of eager young faces. "These invaders think they can just waltz in and take our home. Well, they've got another thing coming. We're going to show them what humanity is made of, and we're going to do it with the Thunderbolt leading the charge." A cheer went up from the assembled pilots, their spirits lifted by Callum's words. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, but they also knew that they were fighting for something greater than themselves, the very future of their world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Callum climbed back into the Thunderbolt's cockpit, his hands gripping the controls with a familiar confidence. He could feel the old fighter's engines thrumming with power, its weapon systems primed and ready for the battle to come. "All right, old girl," Callum murmured, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Let's show these aliens what we're made of." With a roar, the Thunderbolt lifted off, leading the human forces into the uncertain twilight, ready to face whatever the alien invaders had in store. As the Thunderbolt soared into the darkening sky, Callum could feel the familiar adrenaline coursing through his veins. It had been years since he'd flown in combat, but the muscle memory and instincts were as sharp as ever. He knew this fighter like the back of his hand, and he was determined to use every ounce of that knowledge to defend his home. The alien vessels soon appeared on the horizon, their sleek, angular forms cutting through the atmosphere with unsettling grace. Callum's eyes narrowed as he studied their movements, his mind racing to anticipate their tactics. "All units, stay close and follow my lead." Callum's voice crackled over the communication channel. "We need to hit them hard and fast, before they can overwhelm us with their numbers." The human pilots responded with a chorus of affirmations, their fighters falling into a tight formation behind the Thunderbolt. Callum took a deep breath, his fingers tightening on the controls as he prepared to engage the enemy. With a roar, the Thunderbolt surged forward, its powerful engines propelling the aging fighter into the fray. Callum's movements were fluid and precise, his reflexes honed by years of battle. He weaved the Thunderbolt through the alien ship's barrage of laser fire, the old fighter darting and pivoting with a grace that belied its years. As the Thunderbolt closed the distance, Callum unleashed a devastating volley of missiles and laser fire, his aim true and unwavering. The alien vessels, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, struggled to mount an effective defense. One by one, their shields flickered and failed, their hulls succumbing to the relentless assault. The human pilots, emboldened by the Thunderbolt's display of power, surged forward, their own weapons adding to the chaos. Callum could see the tide of the battle shifting, the aliens' overconfidence slowly giving way to a desperate struggle for survival. "Keep it up, everyone," Callum barked, his voice urging the human forces onward. "Don't let them regroup." The Thunderbolt, seemingly imbued with a new lease on life, continued its lethal dance through the alien formation. Callum pushed the old fighter to its limits, his hands guiding it with the precision of a surgeon, each shot and maneuver calculated to maximum effect. As the alien vessels fell one by one, the remaining invaders began to scatter, their once formidable fleet descending into disarray. Callum seized the opportunity, his fingers dancing across the Thunderbolt's controls as he unleashed a devastating volley of missiles, targeting the alien command ship. The massive vessel rocked under the assault, its shields flickering and failing as the Thunderbolt's weapons tore through its defenses. Callum pressed the attack, his eyes narrowed with fierce determination, until finally, the command ship erupted in a massive explosion, its fiery demise heralding the retreat of the remaining alien vessels. A cheer went up from the human pilots as they watched the invaders flee, their tails tucked firmly between their legs. Callum allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, his grip on the Thunderbolt's controls finally relaxing as the adrenaline began to subside. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice tinged with pride. "Now let's get back and regroup. I have a feeling this is far from over." As the Thunderbolt led the human forces back to the decommissioning facility, Callum couldn't help but marvel at the old fighter's performance. It had been years since he'd flown in combat, but the Thunderbolt had responded to his commands with the same unwavering precision as it had in the past. The bond between pilot and machine was still as strong as ever, a testament to the countless hours they had spent honing their skills together. Touching down, Callum was immediately surrounded by a crowd of cheering technicians and pilots, their faces alight with a renewed sense of hope and determination. The Thunderbolt, once destined for the scrapyard, had become a symbol of humanity's resilience and fighting spirit. "Sir, that was incredible." The young lieutenant from earlier approached Callum, her eyes shining with admiration. "I've never seen anything like it. How did you manage to fly that thing so effortlessly?" Callum allowed himself a wry smile, his gaze drifting back towards the Thunderbolt. "It's a long story, Lieutenant," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "But let's just say that the Thunderbolt and I have been through a lot together." He turned to face the assembled crowd, his expression solemn. "This is just the beginning, though," he warned. "The aliens will be back, and when they are, we'll need to be ready. We can't let our guard down, not for a second." The crowd fell silent, the gravity of Callum's words sinking in. They all knew that the battle for their world had only just begun, and that the Thunderbolt and its veteran pilot would be at the forefront of the fight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Callum stepped back towards the Thunderbolt, his fingers caressing the familiar metal frame. "Don't worry, old girl," he murmured. "We're just getting started." The alien vessels, their sleek hulls scared and smoking from the Thunderbolt's relentless assault, began to falter in the face of the human counteroffensive. Callum could see the confusion and desperation in their movements, their once confident formations descending into chaos as they struggled to mount an effective defense. "Keep up the pressure," Callum barked into the communication channel, his voice cutting through the cacophony of laser fire and explosions. "Don't let them regroup." The human pilots, their spirits buoyed by the Thunderbolt's display of power, surged forward, their weapons adding to the devastation that Callum was unleashing upon the invaders. One by one, the alien vessels succumbed to the onslaught, their advanced technologies and armaments proving no match for the sheer tenacity and skill of the veteran pilot. Callum's eyes narrowed as he studied the enemy's movements, his mind racing to anticipate their next move. He knew that the Thunderbolt's capabilities were limited compared to the alien ships, and that he would need to employ every trick in his arsenal if he wanted to keep the upper hand. Suddenly, a new wave of alien vessels emerged from the darkness, their arrival catching the human forces off guard. Callum cursed under his breath, his fingers tightening on the Thunderbolt's controls as he prepared to meet the new threat. "All units, split up and engage the enemy," he ordered, his voice calm and decisive. "I'll draw their attention and keep them occupied. Cover me and look for any openings you can exploit." The human pilots responded without hesitation, their fighters peeling off and engaging the alien vessels in a series of complex maneuvers. Callum, meanwhile, focused his attention on the new arrivals, his fingers dancing across the Thunderbolt's controls as he guided the old fighter through a series of daring evasive maneuvers. The alien ships, their sensors struggling to track the Thunderbolt's erratic movements, found themselves unable to land a solid hit. Callum, capitalizing on their confusion, unleashed a barrage of missiles and laser fire, his aim true and unwavering as he chipped away at the invaders' defenses. As the human pilots continued to harry the alien flanks, the Thunderbolt's assault began to take its toll. One by one, the invading vessels succumbed to the relentless onslaught, their shields flickering and failing under the weight of the devastating bombardment. Callum, his mind focused with laser-like intensity, pushed the Thunderbolt to its limits, the old fighter responding to his commands with a grace and power that belied its age. He weaved through the enemy formation, his weapons blazing, as he sought to disrupt the aliens' cohesion and expose their weaknesses. The tide of the battle had turned, and the human forces, emboldened by the Thunderbolt's performance, began to gain the upper hand. Callum could see the desperation in the aliens' movements, their once confident formations descending into disarray as they struggled to mount an effective defense. "Keep it up, everyone," Callum shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're breaking them." The human pilots, their spirits soaring, redoubled their efforts, their weapons adding to the devastation that the Thunderbolt was unleashing upon the invaders. Callum, his eyes narrowed with fierce determination, continued to push the old fighter to its limits, his fingers dancing across the controls as he guided the Thunderbolt through a series of daring maneuvers. As the battle raged on, the alien vessel's defenses began to crumble. Callum seized the opportunity, his fingers tightening on the trigger as he unleashed a devastating volley of missiles and laser fire, targeting the enemy's command ship. The massive vessel rocked under the assault, its shields flickering and failing as the Thunderbolt's weapons tore through its defenses. Callum pressed the attack, his eyes narrowed with fierce determination, until finally the command ship erupted in a massive explosion, its fiery demise heralding the retreat of the remaining alien vessels. A cheer went up from the human pilots as they watched the invaders flee, their tails firmly tucked between their legs. Callum allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, his grip on the Thunderbolt's controls finally relaxing as the adrenaline began to subside. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice tinged with pride. "Now let's get back and regroup. I have a feeling this is far from over." As the Thunderbolt led the human forces back to the decommissioning facility, Callum couldn't help but marvel at the old fighter's performance. It had been years since he'd flown in combat, but the Thunderbolt had responded to his commands with the same unwavering precision as it had in the past. The bond between pilot and machine was still as strong as ever, a testament to the countless hours they had spent honing their skills together. Touching down, Callum was immediately surrounded by a crowd of cheering technicians and pilots, their faces alight with a renewed sense of hope and determination. The Thunderbolt, once destined for the scrapyard, had become a symbol of humanity's resilience and fighting spirit. "Sir, that was incredible." The young lieutenant from earlier approached Callum, her eyes shining with admiration. "I've never seen anything like it. How did you manage to fly that thing so effortlessly?" Callum allowed himself a wry smile, his gaze drifting back towards the Thunderbolt. "It's a long story, Lieutenant," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "But let's just say that the Thunderbolt and I have been through a lot together." As the human forces regrouped and the cheers of victory echoed through the decommissioning facility, Callum could feel the weight of the moments settling upon his shoulders. The Thunderbolt had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, but he knew that this was merely a temporary reprieve. The alien invaders would return, and when they did, they would be even more determined to crush the human resistance. Stepping out of the Thunderbolt's cockpit, Callum gazed up at the scared and battle-worn fighter, a sense of pride and trepidation mingling in his heart. The old war horse had proven its mettle once again, its capabilities far exceeding the expectations of the human defenders. But Callum knew that the true test lay ahead, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down for a single moment. "Sir, we've got a problem." The young lieutenant approached him, her expression grave. "Our scanners have detected the alien fleet regrouping in the outer system. They're preparing to launch another assault, and this time they look even more determined." Callum's jaw tightened as he digested the news, his mind racing to formulate a plan of action. "Gather all available pilots and technicians," he commanded, his voice calm and authoritative. "We need to get the Thunderbolt back into the air as soon as possible. And make sure our defenses are reinforced. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." The lieutenant nodded, her expression resolute. "Right away, sir. I'll get the teams mobilized immediately." As the lieutenant hurried off to carry out her orders, Callum turned his attention back to the Thunderbolt, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of the fighter's hull. He knew that the old warhorse would be the key to their survival, but he also knew that he couldn't rely on it alone. The human forces would need to be at their absolute best if they were to have any chance of repelling the alien onslaught. Within the hour, the decommissioning facility had been transformed into a hive of frantic activity. Technicians swarmed the Thunderbolt, their fingers flying across the control panels as they worked to ensure the fighter's systems were fully operational. Pilots gathered in briefing rooms, poring over tactical data and formulating their strategies for the coming battle. Callum, his gaze steely and his movements sure, oversaw the preparations with a watchful eye. He knew that every second counted, and he was determined to leave no stone unturned in his efforts to ensure the human force's readiness. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the roar of the Thunderbolt's engines once again pierced the air, the legendary fighter taking to the skies with a grace and power that belied its age. Callum gripped the controls, his eyes narrowed with fierce determination as he guided the Thunderbolt towards the gathering alien fleet. The invaders, their sensors having detected the Thunderbolt's approach, surged forward, their weapon systems powering up with an ominous hum. Callum, his mind focused with laser-like intensity, maneuvered the old fighter with a deftness that left the alien pilot scrambling to respond. Once again, the Thunderbolt unleashed a devastating barrage of missiles and laser fire, its weapons finding their mark with unerring precision. The alien vessels, their confidence shaken by the ferocity of the human counterattack, struggled to mount an effective defense. But as the battle raged on, Callum could feel the strain starting to take its toll on the Thunderbolt. The old fighter, while still a formidable weapon, was not built to withstand the relentless onslaught of the alien assault. Its shields were beginning to falter, and Callum knew that he would need to find a way to break the deadlock before the Thunderbolt was overwhelmed. Gritting his teeth, Callum pushed the old fighter to its limits, weaving through the enemy formation with a series of daring maneuvers that kept the alien pilots off balance. He could see the human forces rallying around the Thunderbolt, their own fighters adding to the devastation that Callum was unleashing upon the invaders. But even as the human pilots fought with a desperate determination, Callum knew that they were running out of time. The alien fleet was simply too large, too powerful, to be held off indefinitely. They needed a decisive victory, a way to break the enemy's will and force them into retreat. Suddenly, an idea took hold in Callum's mind, a desperate gambit that could turn the tide of the battle. Gripping the Thunderbolt's controls, he guided the old fighter towards the alien command ship, his fingers tightening on the trigger as he prepared to unleash a devastating salvo of ordnance. The alien vessels, sensing the Thunderbolt's approach, converged on the old fighter, their weapons systems blazing. Callum, his eyes narrowed with focus, weaved the Thunderbolt through the barrage of laser fire, his heart pounding in his chest as he closed in on his target. With a final burst of speed, the Thunderbolt streaked towards the alien command ship, its weapons unleashing a devastating volley of missiles and laser fire. The massive vessel rocked under the assault, its shields flickering and failing as the Thunderbolt's armaments tore through its defenses. Callum, his nerves steeled, pushed the Thunderbolt to its limits, pouring on the speed as he sought to escape the blast radius of the impending explosion. And as the alien command ship erupted in a massive fireball, the remaining invaders, their resolve shattered, began a hasty retreat, their ships disappearing into the depths of space. A cheer went up from the human forces as they watched the alien fleet scatter, their triumph tinged with a sense of relief and exhaustion. Callum, his grip on the Thunderbolt's controls finally relaxing, allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. "That's right, you bastards," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the old fighter's engines. "Run." As the Thunderbolt glided back towards the decommissioning facility, Callum couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The aliens had been driven off, but he knew that they would return. And when they did, the human forces would need to be ready. As the Thunderbolt touched down at the decommissioning facility, The cheers of the assembled crowd echoed across the tarmac. Callum emerged from the cockpit, his face etched with a weary but resolute expression. The old fighter had performed beyond anyone's expectations, and the human forces had emerged victorious against the alien invaders. Yet Callum couldn't help but feel a pang of unease as he surveyed the jubilant crowd. He knew that this was only a temporary respite, a brief moment of triumph before the inevitable return of the alien fleet. "Sir, that was incredible." The young lieutenant from earlier approached him, her eyes shining with awe and admiration. "I've never seen anything like it. How did you manage to pull that off?" Callum offered her a wry smile, his gaze drifting back towards the Thunderbolt. "It's a long story, Lieutenant," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "But let's just say that the Thunderbolt and I have been through a lot together." The lieutenant nodded, her expression sobering as she seemed to sense the weight of Callum's words. "I understand, sir, but you've given us a fighting chance, something we wouldn't have had without you and this old warhorse." Callum inclined his head in acknowledgement, his eyes scanning the crowd as they surged forward, their faces alight with excitement and relief. He could see the hope in their eyes, the belief that they had finally found a way to turn the tide against the alien invaders. "This is just the beginning, though," Callum mourned, his voice cutting through the celebratory atmosphere. "The aliens will be back, and when they are, we'll need to be ready. We can't let our guard down, not for a single moment." The crowd fell silent, the gravity of Callum's words sinking in. They all knew that the battle for their world had only just begun, and that the Thunderbolt and its veteran pilot would be at the forefront of the fight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Callum stepped back towards the Thunderbolt, his fingers caressing the familiar metal frame. "Don't worry, old girl," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the din of the cheering crowd. "We're just getting started." In the days that followed, the Thunderbolt's triumph became the stuff of legend, its name whispered with a reverence that bordered on the divine. Callum, the veteran pilot who had defied the odds and single-handedly turned the tide of the battle, was hailed as a hero, his deeds celebrated in ballads and triumphant parades. Yet, despite the accolades and the adulation, Callum remained focused on the task at hand. He knew that the alien invaders would return, and he was determined to ensure that the human forces were ready to meet them head-on. Under Callum's guidance, the Thunderbolt underwent a comprehensive refurbishment, its systems upgraded and its weapons systems reinforced. The veteran pilot worked tirelessly, drilling the human pilots in complex combat maneuvers and strategic planning, imparting the wisdom of his decades-long career to the eager young flyers. As the days turned into weeks, the decommissioning facility hummed with activity, the sound of engines and the clang of tools echoing across the tarmac. Callum, his eyes narrowed with determination, oversaw every aspect of the preparations, ensuring that the Thunderbolt and its supporting forces were ready for the inevitable confrontation with the alien invaders. Finally, the day arrived. The alien fleet, its massive vessels cutting through the sky with a menacing grace, descended upon the human stronghold, its weapon systems blazing with a fury that shook the very foundations of the planet. Callum, his grip tightening on the Thunderbolt's controls, led the human forces into the fray, the old fighter surging forward with a power and agility that defied its age. The battle that followed was a brutal and unforgiving affair, with the human pilots fighting tooth and nail to hold back the relentless alien onslaught. But this time, the Thunderbolt was not alone. Reinforced by the upgrades and the lessons imparted by Callum, the human forces fought with a determination and skill that caught the aliens off guard. One by one, the invading vessels faltered and fell, their advanced technologies no match for the sheer grit and resourcefulness of the human defenders. As the last of the alien ships retreated, a cheer rose up from the exhausted but triumphant human pilots. Callum, his face etched with a fierce pride, guided the Thunderbolt back to the decommissioning facility, the old fighter's engines roaring with a renewed vigor. The crowd that awaited them was unlike anything Callum had ever seen, a sea of faces alight with joy and reverence, their cheers and applause thundering across the tarmac. The Thunderbolt, once destined for the scrapyard, had become a symbol of humanity's resilience and unwavering spirit, a beacon of hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. As Callum stepped out of the Thunderbolt's cockpit, he was immediately surrounded by a throng of admirers, their hands reaching out to touch the weathered metal of the old fighter. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, his gaze sweeping across the adoring crowd, before raising a hand to silence the din. "This victory is not mine alone," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with a clarity that silenced the crowd. "It belongs to all of us, to the pilots who fought bravely, to the technicians who kept our machines running, and to the people who never lost hope in the face of adversity." Callum turned, his hand resting on the Thunderbolt's fuselage, and offered the old fighter a reverent nod. "And to this old warhorse, who has proven time and time again that the human spirit cannot be broken." As the crowd erupted in a thunderous ovation, Callum knew that the battle for their world had only just begun. But with the Thunderbolt at their side, and the unwavering determination of the human forces, he was confident that they would emerge victorious against the alien invaders, no matter the cost. In the aftermath of the decisive victory, the Thunderbolt became a symbol of hope and resilience for the people of the besieged planet. The aged fighter plane, once slated for the scrapyard, had become the cornerstone of humanity's defense against the relentless alien invasion. Callum, the veteran pilot whose skill and determination had turned the tide of battle, was hailed as a national hero. But even as he basked in the adulation and admiration of the crowds, he knew that the fight was far from over. The alien invaders would return, and when they did, the human forces would need to be ready. Under Callum's guidance, the Thunderbolt underwent an extensive restoration process, its systems upgraded and its weapons systems reinforced. The old fighter was no longer just a relic of a bygone era. It was a formidable weapon, a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. As the months passed, the decommissioning facility that had once been the Thunderbolt's final resting place transformed into a bustling hub of activity. Technicians and engineers worked around the clock, pouring their hearts and souls into the restoration of the legendary fighter plane. Callum, his eyes narrowed with focus, oversaw every aspect of the process, ensuring that the Thunderbolt was ready to take to the skies once again. He knew that the fate of their world rested on the old fighter's shoulders, and he was determined to leave no stone unturned in his efforts to prepare it for the battles to come. Finally, the day of the Thunderbolt's grand unveiling arrived, and the planet's citizens gathered in awestruck silence as the meticulously restored fighter plane was wheeled out onto the tarmac. Its sleek, angular frame gleamed in the sunlight, its engines purring with a power and intensity that belied its age. Callum, standing tall and proud beside the Thunderbolt, addressed the crowd, his voice carrying a weight and gravity that silenced even the most boisterous onlookers. "My friends," he began, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, "this is not just a fighter plane. This is a symbol of our resilience, our determination, and our refusal to be conquered by those who would seek to destroy us." He paused, his hand resting on the Thunderbolt's fuselage, his fingers caressing the smooth metal with a reverence that was palpable. "When the alien invaders first descended upon our world, they thought they could crush us with their overwhelming might. But they underestimated the strength of the human spirit, the unwavering courage that burns within each and every one of us." The crowd erupted in a thunderous roar of approval, their cheers and applause echoing across the tarmac. "And this," Callum continued, his voice rising above the din, "this is the embodiment of that spirit. The Thunderbolt, once destined for the scrapyard, has been reborn, a testament to the power of determination and the indomitable will of our people." He turned to face the Thunderbolt, his expression solemn and resolute. "This fighter plane will not be relegated to a museum or a static display. No, it will take to the skies once more, ready to defend our world against those who would seek to destroy it. And when the alien invaders return, as they surely will, The Thunderbolt will be there, ready to lead the charge, to show them the true might of the human race. The crowd erupted in a deafening cheer, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph and defiance. Callum raised his hand, silencing the din, his gaze sweeping across the assembled throng. Today, we stand united, ready to face whatever challenges may come our way. And with the Thunderbolt at our side, we will emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As the crowd roared its approval, Callum stepped back, a satisfied smile gracing his weathered features. The Thunderbolt, once destined for the scrapyard, had been reborn, its legend cemented in the annals of history. In the days that followed, the Thunderbolt became a revered fixture in the planet's defense forces, its very presence a rallying cry for the beleaguered human population. Callum, his skills honed to a razor's edge, led the charge against the alien invaders, the old fighter plane cutting a swath of destruction through the enemy's ranks. And when the final, decisive battle was fought, the Thunderbolt was there, its weapons blazing with a fury that shook the very foundations of the planet. Callum, his eyes narrowed with grim determination, pushed the old fighter to its limits, unleashing a devastating barrage that shattered the alien command ship and sent the invading fleet into full retreat. In the aftermath of the victory, the Thunderbolt was accorded the highest of honors. Instead of being relegated to a museum or a static display, the legendary fighter plane was carefully preserved and maintained, its systems constantly upgraded to ensure that it remained a formidable weapon in the ongoing defense of the planet. Callum, his duties as a pilot now behind him, took on the role of curator, overseeing the Thunderbolt's preservation and ensuring that its legacy would be passed down to future generations. He knew that the fight was not over, that the alien invaders would return, and that the human forces would need every advantage they could muster. But as he stood before the gleaming, battle-scarred frame of the Thunderbolt, Callum couldn't help but feel a sense of profound pride and gratitude. This was no longer just a fighter plane. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a testament to the power of determination and the indomitable spirit of the human race. And as the planet's citizens gathered to pay their respects to the Thunderbolt, Callum knew that the old warhorse would forever hold a special place in their hearts, a beacon of hope in the face of adversity, and a reminder that the human spirit could never be broken.